Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the San Mateo Dental Society meeting. Looks like we have quite a few people coming in and joining us tonight. My name is Zach Held. I am the 2024 San Mateo County Dental Society President-elect. Before we get started, I want to review how I'll be running the meeting. All participants will be placed on mute. During the presentation, you may post a question in the Q&A box. For those participants on your desktop, the Q&A box is located at the bottom of your screen. For those on an iPad or iPhone, the Q&A box should be in the upper right. Please feel free to post your questions, and if time permits, we will go over them at the end. So now, let's get started. Benjamin Tuinei began his dental career in 2007 while working for a small dental corporation in Phoenix, Arizona, managing all insurance-related functions. During his first few months, he created systems and operating protocols and restructured a 12-person billing department that improved collections from a low 65% to 98%. Mr. Tuinei opened Optimum Dental Solutions in September 2009 to serve the needs of dentists who were actively seeking assistance in improving their insurance reimbursements. In 2014, Optimum Dental Solutions was rebranded to Veritas Dental Resources. During its first 2 years in operation, Optimum Dental Solutions contracted with over 400 dental practices, influencing a combined $10 million in additional annual revenue increases by implementing Mr. Tuinei's proprietary PPO optimization strategies and effective third-party payer negotiating. To date, Mr. Tuinei has worked with over 7,000 dentists, influencing over $3 billion of newly negotiated revenue for his clients. He currently serves as the president of Veritas Dental Resources and sits on the board of directors for the Dental Business School, Business Ownership Mentoring of America, the Dental Leadership Academy, and co-host on the Navigating Dental Insurance podcast. Mr. Tuinei has been recognized by several state dental associations and various dental study clubs as the authority on PPO strategies and PPO fee negotiating.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Zach. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Mary and Jim, for organizing this meeting tonight. And good evening, everybody. It's great to be with you here today. We're going to talk about some really fun concepts as it pertains to dropping insurance in a way where our patients don't fire us as their dentist. And I'm not a dentist. So by way of background, I'm been in dentistry for the most part as a business person, and I started as an executive and sort of worked my way down to building a business to help doctors with what I've learned in terms of my expertise in dentistry as it pertains to dealing with insurance. I want to tell a quick story to sort of set the tone for tonight's meeting from the perspective of knowledge and the perspective of sort of an understanding of things and the differences of opinions, differences of belief systems and things of that nature, because this story sort of helps us tie things in from the perspective of understanding that everybody has a different opinion and there are multiple different ways in which you can drop insurance. I just so happen to have a process that I believe in that produces the greatest results that I've personally seen in terms of patient retention. So here we go with this story. Oh, and by the way, you will quickly notice and observe that I'm not necessarily a one that follows the line of clean language, but I'll try not to say anything inappropriate or cringeworthy, but there are some potty mouth words in these stories here in case you have children close to you. So that's my warning for language, and it's not that bad. Don't worry about that. So here we go. An atheist was seated next to a little girl on an airplane, and he turned to her and asked, "Do you want to talk? I heard that flights go by much quicker if you strike a conversation with your fellow passengers." The little girl, who had just started to read her book, replied to the total stranger, "Well, what would you like to talk about?" "Oh, I don't know," said the atheist. "How about why there is no God, or no heaven or hell, or no life after death?" as he smiled smugly. "Okay," she replied. "Those could be interesting topics, but let me ask you a question first. A horse, a cow, and a deer, they all eat the same stuff, grass. Yet a deer excretes little pellets, while a cow turns out a flat patty, but a horse produces clumps. Why do you suppose that is? The atheist, surprised by the little girl's intelligence, thinks about it for a second and responds with, well, I actually have no idea. To which the little girl replies, do you really feel qualified to discuss God, heaven and hell, or life after death when you don't know shit? And I apologize if that offends anybody. The objective with that story is that, as I mentioned, everybody has a different belief system. Everybody has a different process on what works best for them. I'm in the process of training my son how to hit a baseball as a 13-year-old, and his coach that was teaching him for the last 3 years only got him to hit 200-foot baseballs. But applying a few techniques that I know, he's up to 320 with his long hit with the baseball. And everybody has a different way of doing things. What you're going to hear from me tonight is my version based upon proven methods that help us retain patients when we go out of network. I want to first start with another story as it pertains to insurance, a personal story, if you will, that sort of shapes the why behind the conversation of insurance, out of network, right? Think about for a second, if you are thinking about going out of network, why? And it can't just be because of inflation. It has to be stronger than that, right? I don't know if any of you remember when Mike Tyson fought Buster Douglas. If you remember that particular fight, of course, Mike Tyson was the reigning champion, but Buster Douglas lost his mom leading up to this fight. His mom passed away, and his mom told Buster that he's going to be the world champion in boxing, the heavyweight world champion, that is. And sure enough, Buster Douglas gets knocked out by Mike Tyson, but he was saved by the bell. The rules back then, bell rings and you can't call a knockout, so he was saved. And a few rounds later, he ends up knocking out Mike Tyson because inside of him, what his mom told him, he really believed that he was going to be a champion, a world champion. He really believed that he was going to beat Mike Tyson, and sure enough, he did. So your why has to be very strong. It has to have a substance to it that you, your team members, and your patients will believe. And if you don't know that yet, if you don't know what that why is, I'm gonna make a suggestion on what your why could be. But that's something that you're gonna have to decide on your own. I want to start with an activity real quick and share with you my why on why I teach these concepts. As controversial as a lot of the things that I teach these from my perspective based upon my own experience in dealing with insurance. So fair warning, this is a personal story. You are going to see images of a premature child, a 24-weeker to be exact. And I understand that in every setting, every study club or conference setting that I go to, there's always somebody in the room that has had a premature child where these images could be upsetting. So that's my trigger warning for anybody that has gone through a preemie experience. My apologies in advance if that sort of offends you or gives you emotions that rubs you the wrong way. But this is my story in terms of the why, as sort of an example on how areas that you could think about in terms of building your own why, because that is a foundation on why we do things in an excellent way, or why we have such a high level of motivation to have a sense of urgency to achieve. To me, it's my why. So here we go with these images. So I want to invite you to my home and have you meet my son Welton. So this is the 13-year-old that I referenced, my baseball player, musician of a son. At the 19 weeks gestation, my wife started to show signs of kidney failure, which is very common for high-risk pregnancies. And at that time, she was advised by the perinatologists that were overseeing her care at the time to be put on bed rest at home. The objective was to lower that stress level, keep the blood pressure as controlled as possible. Keeping the child in was a main priority because at 19 weeks gestation, during this period of time, there was a 0% survival for those children, 19 weekers. So we were told that we needed to follow this treatment plan, which we did. By 22 weeks, of course, every week she's going in for labs and checkups and all that. We made it to 22 weeks, and the perinatologist admitted her into a hospital and said, look, you're now in liver failure and your kidneys are shutting down a lot faster than we anticipated. So we need to put you in a hospital setting because the science of the time indicated that 19-weekers don't survive. 22-weekers don't survive. 23-weekers had less than a 7% chance of survival. 24-weekers had above an 80% chance of survival. 25-weekers, so the older the children get in the womb, the more developed their organs become, and the more viable they are outside of the womb, although premature. And 24 weeks at the time was the benchmark. We have to make it to 24 weeks minimum in order for your son to have the greatest chance of survival, but holding him in there longer would be a good idea as well. So in this hospital setting, we stayed there for 2 weeks and 2 days, at least before the next step was, which in this case, at 2 weeks and 2 days into this hospital, the OBs came in with a perinatologist that worked at this hospital and said, hey, today's the day. Your labs came back, and this afternoon you started to show signs of heart failure. And so you're now in kidney failure, liver failure, and it's very apparent because you're jaundiced now. Your body is changing and it's starting to shut down. And after the heart shuts down, we can't let that happen. And of course, they didn't say this, but that's basically the end of the journey for both mom and son. And so they treatment planned a C-section and said, we need to perform this immediately. And of course, gave us informed consent and all the information that we needed to know about next steps and all that. So they performed that C-section, and this was the result. That's my left hand draped over his body. This is quite literally within 10 minutes of the delivery. He was 1 pound, 10 ounces, 13 inches in height, needless to say, a struggling little guy. And after answering all the health history questions with the neonatologist now that's overseeing my son's care, I go back to the OR and I just sit there as they complete the surgery, and then we wheel my wife back to the recovery room. This is closer to midnight, and I'm just sitting there sort of pondering, figuring things out, right? How to be as a person, as a brand new father, how to be a father, right? Nobody gives you, and we all joke about this, you don't have a manual on how to be a parent. And I took this very seriously at the time, is that, I need to figure out how to contribute. Not being a clinician, I need to figure out how to help. So into this experience, which I often refer to this experience as sort of a very sacred pondering moment for me, meditating, trying to figure out who to become, I hear this faint knock on the door. And in comes a gentleman, which my initial impression was it was a clergy member, a priest, or somebody from a church coming to offer a prayer or something of that nature. And I accepted this gentleman in, and he had a pretty large set of documents with him. And he quietly whispers and says, hey, Mr. Tuinei, congratulations on being a first-time father. Just want to let you know that your wife and son are in good hands. This is a really great hospital setting for what you're going through. And we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that your wife and son have all the support that we can give them. And so that was a nice gesture. But then he went into this. He said, and I'm here on a specific mission because your son is having some complications, and we discovered that he actually requires open heart surgery in order for him to live. And this is a type of surgery that has to be performed as soon as possible. And the doctors are estimating that if this is not done within the next 60 minutes, there's a good possibility that he just won't make it through the night. So on behalf of the hospital, I'm here to seek your consent to proceed with this treatment. So this sounds familiar, right? This is the informed consent case presentation and all that. So he then hands me a document about that thick. I received it, looked at the last page, and it was 603 pages long. I then turned to him because he gave me a 30-second disclosure on what my son needed, and yet there's at least 10 hours worth of reading material in front of me. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but nobody can read a 603-page legal document in 30 minutes. And I told him that. I said, hey, I feel like there's something in these documents that you didn't really discuss, and I know that treatment is urgent. but I need to feel informed. I need to know what my options are in order for me to make the best decision possible. And we really, so the sad thing about this scenario is that we kind of debated about this whole idea of informed consent for about 5 minutes. And for anybody that has been in a situation where what you say will determine whether somebody gets to live or die, it's a very heavy burden, especially when you're talking about a piece of you, right? A child, a person that is living with a heartbeat, right? Although a brand new person to the world, I still took it seriously that, hey, I kind of feel obligated to make sure that my son gets the best care possible, and I need to make the best decision possible. And that was the whole basis of me arguing with this guy for 5 minutes. At the 5-minute mark, which felt like an eternity, he finally turned to me and said, hey, Mr. Tuinei, I think the most important thing you need to know and understand is that you have to make a decision fast. And by signing these documents, you're at least giving your son a chance. By not signing it, you are guaranteeing that he'll pass. He won't make it. And at that point, I didn't really know what questions to ask because I didn't receive enough information to know what to ask. So I just signed a document. I took page 603, signed it, dated it. And what was really impressive to me is that I was handing him the document. These words came to my mind. And I said, I'm going to go ahead and sign this and give it to you. And I'm going to go ahead and agree to this. But one thing I want you to know is what I'm signing is an acknowledgement that there are words on 603 pages of this legal agreement, but I don't understand it. I didn't read any of it. So by signing this, all I'm acknowledging is that I'm signing a document and acknowledging that they have words on the paper. And I think that kind of woke him up because I finished with, so what that means is going into this blindly, that my signature cannot be held up in a court of law as it pertains to informed consent. So if my son dies, I have a legitimate reason to sue this hospital, because if there was another decision to make and I wasn't presented with that decision that would influence him to live, you're still on the hook from a liability perspective. And that's how the law works in this scenario. So that was a wake-up call for him, and he finally gave me what I needed. He turned to me and said, Mr. Tuinei, so the issue is that you have a health insurance plan where the doctors that normally perform this procedure, the specialists, they're not participating with your health plan, and your health plan just so happens to not have any reimbursements for out-of-network providers for this type of treatment. However, the good news is that we do have doctors that do perform this procedure, and they are scrubbing in and they are in network with your plan. And by consenting to this treatment, you're giving the hospital the authority to use those doctors. So that was a red flag. I immediately, now I had information to ask questions. And I immediately responded with, okay, well, let's talk brass tacks. Let's talk outcomes. What is the survival rate difference between, in this case, the specialists designated for this type of surgery are neonatal cardiothoracic surgeons. The doctors that they were bringing in, and this is nothing against the doctors. There's a whole story on how hospital systems convince doctors to do these types of things, and you'll know here why in a second. So the doctors that they were scrubbing in that were in network were general surgeons. So I asked, what is the difference between the survival rate for this surgery in this hospital for a cardiothoracic surgeon versus a general surgeon? And the reason why I thought to ask this question is I remember the night before, the perinatologists and the OBs talking about all the different possibilities and outcomes, from retina issues to enamel issues as they start to develop teeth to cardiovascular issues. And they did bring up the fact that, hey, there's a possibility, since your son is so young, that he might require this surgery. But I didn't remember the details, but I did remember one component, which they said, this surgery is actually very risky, and your son is actually a candidate for this surgery based upon his age, is that it's a surgery that requires, placing clamps, cutting here and there. But when you place clamps on heart valves, the heart valves are, at this age, they're brittle, they're as brittle as a wet piece of toilet paper, right? So they're very high risk procedures. And so that's what I remember from the discussion the night before. So that's why I asked, is what is the survival rate difference? So get this. He started with the cardiothoracic surgeons. for this surgery in this hospital, 98% or above. So those are great odds, right? And then he went to the general surgeons sort of in a very hesitant fashion and said, survival rate for general surgeons is, it's 15%, depending on the doctor. And at that moment, I had to clarify. I said, did you say 50 or 15? And he wrote it down. He said, it's actually 15. And he wrote it down on a piece of paper. And that sort of, well, number one, it was quite upsetting to hear that. Like 98%, seriously? And because those doctors are out of network, you're saying that I can't get access to that? And 15% is what my insurance company is going to let me have? No way. Like, no flipping way. I don't understand how an insurance carrier or how an insurance plan can influence an outcome where there's a 90% outcome that's no longer available and you get 15%. To me, that kind of tuned me into the broken healthcare system that we have. And it's broken from so many different perspectives that we won't go into tonight. But one of the areas that are broken in dentistry, as we know, is that you just don't get paid what you need to get paid to sustain good quality dentistry. And in this case, with my son's experience, I was just floored at the fact that decisions were made with insurance-driven mentalities in mind, not quality outcomes. And it still bothers me today that this type of practice exists in both dentistry, unfortunately. Not everybody, it's a very small minority of this that happens in dentistry, but on the medical side, it happens every single day. So I've been on a mission to end this. And that's why I tell this story from the perspective of, hey, in network, it doesn't, to me, an in-network status has proven to me that a lot of times patients don't have access to quality, or the quality argument gets eliminated. And I know in dentistry, that's not always true. Patients go out of network because they believe in the doctors, and they go in network, and a lot of practices are in network that do a really great job. But from my experience, it's very blatant to me that in-network is not the solution for everybody, doctors and patients alike. My learning from this experience is that quality not only matters, but should be at the forefront of our treatment plans. It should be at the forefront of how we deal with insurance, is from the perspective of getting the best quality. But I also recognize that the reason why the hospital made this decision, or at least presented treatment in this fashion, is because quality comes at a price. But I wasn't given the opportunity to pay for this procedure out of pocket, which is what I demanded. After being given this treatment, at least these disclosures, I immediately turned over page 603. Well, before that, I voided out my signature and the date. I turned it over. I put on the very top of the form, high-tech insurance waiver. So there's a law called the High-Tech Act, which is an acronym for a federal law, and it was passed in 2009. This incident happened in 2010. So I asked the billing manager, I said, you're familiar with the High-Tech Act? Yes. And he said, yes, sir. We have training on that on a regular basis. And I said, so you understand that I have a constitutional right to invoke an insurance waiver for this treatment and pay for this treatment at my own expense. You understand that, right? And he said, yes, sir, I do. Okay, so here we go. High-tech insurance waiver. I hereby waive the use of my insurance and choose to pay for this procedure on my own accord. And I wish to have and retain the best cardiothoracic surgeon that is on call tonight to perform this procedure. And so I signed that and I dated it. And of course he accepted it. I gave him my wallet and said, let's go, man. Let's get to work. I had quality in mind. That was my objective. And naturally, because I understood the law, I asked for something that was superior than the insurance-driven bullcrap that I was presented with. Naturally, that's exactly how I look at him as an individual, as a person, a human being that has a heartbeat, and he now has beautiful teeth. But he also has a beautiful brain and a great swing of that baseball, that bat. You know, he's just a talented individual. Plays 7 instruments. I mean, look at those teeth, those baby teeth. They don't exist anymore. But here's him as the Incredible Hulk at age 2. And I mentioned at the beginning that I was never a clinician. I take that back. This is my first ever extraction. Hopefully y'all are impressed with that. And then they say that children emulate their parents, right? They kind of observe us and they become us. Well, I'm fairly certain that this particular example of how to sleep, I think that comes from my wife. I don't know if I do that when I sleep, but chances are, since I'm a boy, that I probably do. That is my why. My why in terms of what gets me up every single day to fight the insurance industry the way I do, and get sued on a constant basis. In fact, a year and a half ago, I reported some figures on the number of doctors that have dropped Delta in the state of California, and sure enough, Delta sued me for that. And when you deal with that level of stress, and I know that my career is not any more stressful than that of a dentist. In fact, your career is probably a lot more stressful than mine. But the why, it's motivational from the perspective of everything that we do as professionals, but it's a necessary component for you to be able to have enough of a power of persuasion to influence your team, number one, that you want to go out of network, but also to influence your patients that you're going out of network in a way where those people don't abandon you. They stick with you because they believe in what you do, and your why is solid enough for them to have an enormous amount of respect for you. And my why for dentistry is quality, is that we're going out of network simply because in network, it's hard to sustain good quality, although we're trying our best. But at a certain point in the future, the quality component will be impossible to do under in-network terms. And that is totally the truth. There's so many things that we can talk about that would support that statement. But to me, if I were a dentist, that would be my why, is that I can't sustain quality from an in-network perspective. So going out of network isn't a punishment to you as a patient. It actually is elevating and protecting the integrity of quality care, because we don't have insurance companies unnecessarily breathing down our necks to save money to make themselves look good to Wall Street. We don't play that game, right? We focus on getting people healthy. So that's sort of, in a synopsis, the number one component of going out of network is having that very powerful why. And if you agree that quality is a very solid why, then explore it. Have that become your why. All right. A quick story. Now we're going to get into the content. How did we get here as an industry? You know, when dental insurance started, and we all know, California Dental Association, Oregon, and Washington State Dental Associations started dental plans that eventually became Delta Dental, right? And so the design of dental insurance actually wasn't created by dentists. It wasn't created by our associations. It was created by MetLife. I believe it was 1950. It was a couple of years before the California Dental Association started to explore dental plans, or at least the development of a dental plan for the unions. MetLife created, get this, a $1,000 annual maximum dental plan that went for, I think it was $1.50 a month. But those were the old days of the indemnity plans, right? Where reimbursements were the same to the doctors, no matter the status. If you're in network or out of network, you got the same payment. So from that perspective, when we created dental insurance as an industry, we created it so that we would foster a sense of trust with the community, right? Allow people to focus more on dentistry by having a benefit tool to drive them into the dental practices, which is what medical insurance has already proven to do up to this point, is that it keeps people active with their physicians. So dentists were like, we got to do the same thing. So it was created on the basis of trust. That was the foundation. And the reason why Delta Dental was started is to foster trust with the community. So this particular story about trust that I want to share is about a guy by the name of Derek Hamilton, who in 1996 was convicted of a murder he did not commit. So he stayed, his prison stay was a couple of decades. You know, during his stay in prison, he actually educated himself, and he took courses and enrolled in schools and became a lawyer, mainly because he had a hard time having public defenders defend him in a quality way, a way that truly represented him. So he became a lawyer himself. And so on his own account, and it was during his 23rd year of prison confinement, he was successful in convincing prosecutors that he was wrongfully convicted. So recently, Hamilton actually took on a new role in his calling to fight injustice. He became a successful plaintiff. The legal experience he learned in lockup, it really molded him into one of the greatest advocates for those that were charged with crimes they did not commit. So Hamilton himself was awarded a $7 million settlement for imprisonment that was based upon false and fabricated evidence from a legal system designed to protect its citizens. Again, trust, right? We put so much trust, the public puts so much trust in insurance, and we enroll sort of with that trust. And what I'm about to say is not designed to offend you. So don't take this from the perspective of being offended. It's more so from the perspective of understanding what you're agreeing to when you re-credential or when you join a new dental plan for the first time. So I actually did my own personal study, and I interviewed I polled well over 1,000 dentists. That's a good sampling size, randomly throughout the country. And I asked, how many of you read your PPO or insurance contracts? If you're on an HMO, how many of you actually read them? And surprisingly, less than 1% said, yeah, I read them from top to bottom. And the reason why, in asking doctors why they don't, is they feel like, well, we understand that insurance is heavily regulated. I'm very busy, but we're entering into this relationship because we got a pretty decent fee schedule. We need patients, but we trust the fact that the government will kind of regulate the insurance industry from the perspective of not bullying us. And you and I both know that is BS. Insurance companies tend to violate state and federal laws on a constant basis. And every single day, I see examples of them not following California state's non-covered service law, or denying a buildup, when buildup was absolutely necessary for retention, and changing CDT definitions, which they're not permitted to do, but they do that all the time to pay you less. We can't trust them. So I'm advising you on your insurance contracts, especially if you're joining or re-credentialing, read them. Why? Is because so many doctors are going out of network these days, to where PPO plans are now inserting minimum participation requirements. In fact, here in Utah, we're governed by Delta of California. The re-credentialing for doctors here in Utah, once you agree to re-credentialing, you cannot terminate Delta for 1 year. My advice is, if you need to participate with Delta, but you have a plan to drop them, or even if you don't, take a red pen, strike out that clause, initial it, sign the application, and send it in. I'm seeing a pattern of a lot of insurance carriers not acknowledging that you struck out a clause, but if they accept the contract as you sent it back, that under a series of federal laws called tort laws, which governs contract law. This is from our attorneys. I'm not an attorney. I get this advice from our attorneys. They say that tort law says that if another party in a bilateral contract, which in this case your contract with insurance is it's not unilateral. You get to negotiate the fees. You get to strike out clauses that you disagree with. In a bilateral contract, if both parties agree to the terms and sign the terms as written in the agreement with an effective date, those terms then become a permanent fixed part of that agreement until that agreement expires, meaning upon re-credentialing, you'll have new terms. So I've learned this from another dentist attorney in Arizona, that you can strike out those clauses, and if they accept it, and then they say, well, you can't terminate because it's in the contract. It's like, nice try. Why don't you go ahead and pull up the contract that you signed and I signed, and you will see that I struck out that clause to which you did not acknowledge, but you accepted it, right? Don't trust the insurance companies. And I know that most of you don't already, but that's what's going on. We got to read those contracts. But going back to the presentation, we enroll and we participate with insurance based upon how it was started in dentistry, on the basis of trust. So here's another thing. Inflation rates, you saw that the announcement today, inflation for this year is what, 2.3%. Since 2020, nationwide, it ranges depending on the state, 9 to 13% is what you see in most states since 2020, sometimes even higher. In dentistry in California, based upon wages, wage increases, supply cost increases, just standard operational fixed cost increases since 2020, inflation is at 34% in dentistry. And, you know, the AGD and ADA, this is actually back in at the end of 2020 and 2021. This is the statement that they sent to the insurance industry and said, hey, you got to participate in giving us a little bit more to address the wage inflation that we're experiencing. Every industry is experiencing this, right? So, you know, the big question is, how did the insurance industry respond when they saw these pleas coming in from every direction? Well, Cigna in 2021 started slashing fees by 15 to 36%. Delta in many states, I know California has been on a constant battle with Delta Dental, but in many states, they cut fees by 10 to 20%. And then Dentamax, major umbrella network around the country, especially in California. This plan covers like your Aetnas, your MetLifes, your United Concordias, and so forth. You know, they decided to cut rates by 7 to 18%. And naturally, the emotions of the community, of course, you know, if I could use some emojis to sort of express how people felt, it was depressing. And sadly, even to still this day, like even New York City is one of the states that I see this happening, is that our own team members are standing in food bank lines after work just because they can't make ends meet, right? And here the insurance industry are raking in record profits, you know, during a time in which physicians and dentists and doctors of all kinds that are participating with insurance are suffering. And you're the ones that are keeping people healthy. It's like, seriously, we gotta protect those that keep us healthy, but that's not how insurance thinks, right? So we're gonna talk about effective ways on dropping. I'm gonna go through some scripting, very effective scripting. We'll talk about different ways in which you can go out of network, because there's all different kinds of paths. The way I'm going to teach it today is my preferred way based upon the numbers. And then finally, I guess one of the big questions is, well, if I go out of network, how many patients am I going to lose? And after those patients have left, am I still going to be profitable? Am I still going to be busy? So the Kodak study at the very end is what we're going to talk about to kind of hone it in, to show you what the numbers actually look like and what they could be like if you decide to go out of network with any dental plan, okay? So here are a couple of realities, well, not a couple, a few realities about dental insurance in general. So this has actually been verified and re-verified with most insurance plans in your state, including the largest one, is that 6% or less of individuals with a PPO plan reach their annual max. This number has been consistent for a long time. And then only 22% of individuals with insurance obtain a restorative procedure that requires you to pay a deductible. Only 36 to 37% of adults are considered active in terms of using their insurance on an annual basis. Interestingly, in California, Medi-Cal/Denti-Cal, their utilization rates among people that are gifted healthcare and dental coverage, only 50% of those that have, or children at least, only 50%, 52% in California actually use Denti-Cal every single year. And then when it comes to the PPO plans, what's called a loss ratio, the percentage of the premium that an individual would pay for dental insurance, only half of fully insured plans, only half of that premium actually reaches the dental office in terms of the benefit payout, right? What a terrible way to acquire insurance. I've never had dental insurance for this. Oh, I take that back. When I was employed by other groups before I got into dentistry, I had dental insurance, but I've never had it since then, mainly because when I look at the numbers, people would actually save money. So a local insurance company here in Utah, they did a study to determine over a 5-year period, what is the difference between what a PPO patient would pay and what an uninsured patient would pay. And so the PPO patients, everything, premium, deductibles, co-payments, any out of pocket, right? So 5 years, they indicated that the uninsured patient would save 20%, paying the doctors their full fees of treatment over a 5-year period, assuming that the treatment that an insured patient is the same for an uninsured patient. And you and I both know that insured patients do more treatment than uninsured patients. That's just the way the world works. But they buried the study because the study indicated that you don't need to have insurance. employers can probably have a better plan design and save money. Those that actually do fully insured plans, self-funded plans, the numbers are totally different. That's actually the solution for most employers, is to self-fund their plan. But that's the reality, is that the insurance design is that half of what you pay for a fully insured plan goes towards your benefits. Then the last thing I want to mention, I work very closely with insurance brokers that sell all kinds of insurance products, life insurance, dental, medical, vision. And one of the things on the dental side that I hear all the time is that when broker X is going to an employer, they'll pull the list of providers, doctors that are in network, and they'll go to the employer and say, hey, this dental plan, it's mostly Delta Dental, has the best rates for the plan design that they're offering compared to all other insurance products. But even more importantly than that, Delta Dental has like 95% of the doctors in any community endorse Delta. And that's how they convince employers to go with certain insurance plans. But what they're saying by endorsement is that 95% of doctors are in network with this dental plan. It's not 95%, by the way, in California. It's a lot less than that in terms of who's in network with Delta. But they say that you endorse the insurance company, right? And that's why you're in network. Well, when you talk about most trusted professionals, Gallup polling is one of the best places to go. They do an annual report on who is the most trusted professional based upon consumer feedback or your patient feedback. You know who the number one is? Nurses, which hygienists and dental assistants fall in that category. This is a function of who spends more time with the patient, right? So nurses in hospital settings, hygienists and assistants spend the most time with patients. And naturally, when you spend time with an individual, you tend to create and foster a more solid relationship compared to somebody that spends less time. And so doctors are number two in this. It's not bad news, but that's just a function of you spend less time with patients compared to the hygienists and assistants. So in the doctor category, dentists around the world have kind of ranked from 1 to 5, right? And here in the US, it's 5 in that doctor category. So it's still a very highly trusted position among members, people here in the United States of America. So that's why insurance brokers say you endorse the insurance companies, because they're taking that credibility and they're giving it to the insurance company, which insurance, they rank on the bottom half, right? The bottom part of that next to members of Congress in terms of the least trusted professionals. So great business plan if you run an insurance company, but this is their model, is that they view participation or in-network status as an endorsement. And, they also claim that, the discounts that you're giving the patient, that the insurance companies themselves fought for that on behalf of the patient. There's some truth to that. But at the same time, that should really upset you that they're taking the credit for you taking less money to see an in-network patient, right? And so that's sort of the world of insurance, and to me, very much likely one of the strongest pieces of motivation to get you out of network with as many dental plans that would make sense for you to drop at some point in the future. So around the country, we've done multiple case studies on dental plans and the ease of dropping dental plans. And these are the 3 toughest plans to drop around the country: Delta, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Concordia. Why? In California, you have Blue Cross through Anthem, and then Blue Shield through United Healthcare. And then you have all kinds of other out-of-state Blue Cross Blue Shield plans. When you're out of network with Blue Cross Blue Shield, Blue Cross or Blue Shield, a lot of times they'll send the checks to the patient. Some Blue Crosses will send the checks to you and EOBs to you if you're out of network. So Delta is saying that they're going to start to accept assignment of benefit out of network in most states. But we're not seeing that happening yet in all states. But if you're out of network with Delta or any of the Blue Cross or United Concordia, you have to plan on not getting reimbursed. So naturally, you would have to collect in full at the time of treatment from patients and advise patients that they'll get reimbursed on their own. And there's a way to do that effectively without sort of upsetting your patients. MetLife and Aetna, on the other hand, these are 2 easier plans to drop. And so when we do these case studies, what we find is that a lot of dentists want to drop just Delta. And we have a number of examples from our own colleagues in dentistry, dentists that we've sort of worked with and observed, is that many of them are very successful dropping Delta as the first plan to drop. My opinion is that if you're participating with more plans in Delta, you might want to train your team on a plan that does accept assignment of benefit out of network, and a plan that historically has great numbers from an out of network perspective. MetLife, Aetna, most doctors typically retain 90 to 95% of their patients after they transition out of network. And the overall increase in revenue from MetLife and Aetna, it's closer to 40%, right? So if you master out of network with an easy plan first, training your team to drop a plan that you have to collect in full at the time of treatment, which is a lot more intimidating, you'll have a lot more confidence going into out of network with plans like Delta, Blue Cross, and United Concordia after you've tested that out of network strategy with other PPO plans. Aetna, MetLife, Guardian, and Cigna would be my pick to practice out of network with. Alrighty. So this whole idea of teamwork, okay? We'll get into the selection of dental plans and more details here in a minute, but I want to kind of go through the realities of what insurance executives get paid, right? And this whole concept of teamwork, and that's what insurance companies say, is we're partnering with dentists. In fact, Delta dental commercials, it almost makes Delta look like a dental practice, but they have that mission to partner with dentists from the perspective of getting people healthier, and you and I both know that's not true. So in terms of the insurance motivation, that is. So this is Delta Dental of Washington's executive pay disclosure that Delta Washington sends to Washington State Dental Association every single year. Now, this is about a year or two old, but this kind of illustrates the problem in the industry as it pertains to companies like Delta. James Dwyer there on the very top, he retired and had an exit agreement to get paid the excess, since Delta Dental of Washington is, I believe it's still a not-for-profit, so they can't show a profit on a P&L. What's left over, Delta agreed to pay James that extra money, so $2.6 million. The new CEO is, before James' agreement expired, now the new CEO gets that $2.6 million extra on top of the $2 million that he gets paid in terms of salary, right? So this is one of many examples on how money flows on the executive side of Delta Dental. The insurance industry at large, these are the disclosed salaries that each of these CEOs make. When you add bonuses and dividends and all that stuff, like Aetna CEO easily makes above $50 million a year. Same thing with Anthem. Molina makes about $40 million after you add bonuses and dividends. And this is money that, of course, you would think that would go towards getting people healthier, but sadly, that's just not the case. So in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to convince you of is, number one, we need to teach the insurance industry a lesson. You don't endorse them. And then, of course, number two, there's plenty enough in the insurance budget, as you see, with how much people get paid. There's plenty enough to support out-of-network compensation for those that choose to go out of network, okay? But the whole concept of this is sort of we gotta view out of network from the perspective of we don't endorse them, but if that's how they view it, we need to get our patients to understand that when we go out of network, we never endorse them from the beginning, but in a roundabout way, we're revoking that endorsement, right? Because that's not true, right? So the solution is this: when you go out of network, have that solid why. To me, it's about quality. One phrase that I really love is when I talk to patients about out of network, I tell them that out of network for us is an unrestricted or non-restricted status. It gives us better control over all things clinical that we treat you with, right? Or clinical decisions and a number of different factors that you don't want to go into with a patient, but you just have to convince patients that out of network is your way to have less restrictions in a way where you can protect the quality of care that you're giving patients, okay? Alrighty, so I mentioned MetLife, Aetna, Cigna, and Guardian as the top 4 plans to consider dropping as sort of a training platform, and just pick one. My pick in California is MetLife. And the reason why is because MetLife has some of the best out-of-network benefits, although we are seeing a lot of success with Cigna and Guardian as well, and the same thing with Aetna. Aetna, you just have to be mindful of Aetna patients that have EPO, the exclusive provider organization plan, not the PPO, the EPO. Those plans don't have out-of-network benefits. And it's easy to convince those patients to switch, especially now when open enrollment is about to happen for Costco. I think it's actually probably going on right now. Is you can notify those patients about your desire to go out of network and just let them know, hey, but to stay here, you have to switch to the PPO, right? It's not that much more in terms of their contribution as a patient, but just have that in mind, okay? So plan selection, you want to pick your plan in terms of identifying, okay, this is a plan that we want to train our team members with, and I'll give you the instructions on what to do next here in a minute. But another thing that I like to take a look at when you're dealing with in-network and out-of-network is this whole concept of denials. So if we're picking MetLife, I want to go and see what's my experience from a denial perspective, because you want to measure that before you drop and then after you drop. And most of the times, what you see is that the rate of denials, they tend to kind of fall off as soon as you go out of network. Sometimes they don't, but you have to have this in mind, because if you're out of network and those denials don't work, I mean, those denials are not fixed, you really have to put in a good claim denial management protocol in an effort to make out of network easier. And if you're in network, that's the best time to resolve these denial issues, okay? So in 2017, 60 million worth of claims were denied. Ask yourself how much of that was successfully appealed. And the answer to that is only 5%. So in other words, only 3 million out of 60 million were successfully appealed, where these dental practices were able to at least recoup 3 out of the $60 million, right? So $50 million that legitimately was supposed to be paid towards dental practices in 2017 was not, right? It's a major, massive issue because the data is not 100% all there yet. We're still kind of gathering the information. But so far what we're seeing is that compared to 2017, the rate of denials today is much higher. And that's another reason why we want to fix this as we go out of network, or even before we go out of network, right? So needless to say, that's sort of what's going on in the industry. One quick tip when it comes to appeals. I'm a big believer in utilizing government agencies that have the authority to fight insurance companies more effectively than you on behalf of patients. So your state insurance commissioner is actually very helpful. A lot of practices try the insurance commissioners in California or insurance commissioner in California and they don't get anywhere. And that's mainly because you're calling on behalf of your practice. The insurance commissioner and the funds from the state of California, they prohibit insurance companies from representing medical facilities or dental practices. So the dynamic changes if you call and say, hey, I'm calling on behalf of my patient who has experienced a denial that should have been paid, right? And when you work through the commissioner, what you usually find is that if the commissioner takes the case, they'll send a letter to the insurance company to say, hey, just a quick warning, we are investigating you on behalf of this claim number, right? And we are going to look at it very thoroughly, so just be on hold for when we call you to answer questions. And normally that letter, like when the insurance company looks at it and says, oh, our AI technology auto-denied the claim and told them that it was peer-reviewed, but when you submit for a HIPAA disclosure request on who had access to that claim, which is the patient's right, in the documentation, it'll say that the claim was denied by the computer system. No insurance company is going to admit that, by the way. So they will not let the insurance commissioner investigate that far. Normally, they'll pay the claim. They'll contact the insurance commissioner and say, hey, we reviewed the claim, and we recognize that the last appeal that they sent was legitimate, so we are reversing it, right? What happens on the insurance side when you do that is that the insurance company, they flag you, and that's a good flag. They say, this practice has engaged the insurance commissioner and is familiar with insurance commissioner advocacy. And so normally what happens there is that if they're using an AI technology, which Cigna is getting into big trouble right now for that, if they're using AI technology or any other auto-adjudicated techniques to pay claims or deny claims, they're going to change their algorithms so that you don't receive the same amount of denials as other practices, right? So this is very important to have that established very firmly with insurance carriers, that you're not going to be pushed around, simply because the last thing you want is to go out of network with a plan like Delta and not even know if the claim was denied or not, right? Because the patient's getting the EOB and the patient's getting the reimbursement. But if they get the denial, the advice I usually give patients at that point is, and we have, just sending them a template letter saying, hey, take this to your HR department. Your claim was denied, and we believe that it was denied incorrectly. So if the patient calls, or the HR department calls for that patient's employer, that you see a much faster response time on the part of the insurance companies to reverse the denial, because if whoever's paying the premium complains, the insurance companies have a fiduciary responsibility to address it. They are the boss, right? So I bring this up mainly because there are practices that go out of network and they get all kinds of one-star reviews, mainly because they haven't figured out how to effectively stop the denials or a system to get patients to complain on their end, especially when assignment of benefit is not accepted out of network. You have to have those protocols in place so that you avoid unreasonable patient attrition and bad reviews. Okay, so I will, in the interest of time, I just want to kind of breeze over this real quick here, is that the idea is that we just got to make sure that we have our claims denial management under control. Now, when it comes to dropping insurance, first step that I recommend, in addition to figuring out your claims denial systems, we'll talk about plan selection with MetLife here in a minute. But before we get to all that, let's review the basics of our practice, our office fees. If you go to the Fair Health website, which is that website there, Fair Health, or Fee Estimator, if you're willing to pay $400 for their percentiles. We use NDAS because it's a lot less expensive and the percentiles are pretty close to Fair Health. But you can go to Fair Health to look at what the 80th percentile is on the top website, fairhealthconsumer.org. Plug in your zip code, plug in the CDT codes, and it'll spit out the average allowed amounts and the out-of-network price for that code. And it explains on the website that out-of-network price, that uninsured price is a full fee for that procedure based upon Fair Health's 80th percentile. Most insurance companies have agreed from an out-of-network perspective to follow either the 70th or 80th Fair Health percentile. And that's where you want to be sort of from a fee schedule level. If you really want to max out your earnings, is to be between the 60th and 80th percentiles. Okay. Here's just a picture of Fair Health, very basic information on their website. And again, you could see, the out-of-network or uninsured price, average allowed amounts. So this is actually another good thing. And we're not going to talk about negotiating fees on this webinar tonight, but I take a look at that average allowed amount. And for underneath that, with almost every PPO plan, at that point, hey, there's a problem here. We're not falling in line with these averages, so we need to negotiate to get those up, okay? Part two of the insurance profile is very simple. Okay, let's see who we have a direct contract with and who are our umbrella networks and who's underneath the umbrella networks, right? So here are the common plans in California: Dentamax, Mavris/Zealous, Connection Dental, Carrington being major umbrella networks. So we need to identify those, because if your Aetna contract is through Connection Dental, as an example, don't do what a lot of practices do and lose out on 6 months of not being, 6 months trying to terminate your contract with Aetna directly when Aetna has your contract through Connection. So this activity will sort of help save you time so that okay, who do we need to send the termination letter to? Because what happens if your Aetna contract is through Connection, they won't even tell you that you sent the termination letter to the wrong place, because they don't want you to terminate, so they're just not going to respond. All right, so the other part is identifying out-of-network benefits. Fair Health is actually a really great resource. If you study the Fair Health website and sort of just browse through it, you will identify what each insurance carrier has agreed to compensate doctors based upon percentiles, or what Fair Health percentile that they're going to use. But you can learn a lot about out-of-network benefit structure on the Fair Health website. But another area that you might want to explore is the online portals. Sometimes they give you access to what the patient's out-of-network benefits would be, and that's friendly that's helpful from the perspective of identifying the first plan to drop. In this case, I already mentioned that Aetna, Cigna, Guardian, and MetLife are the best four to train your team on. And of course, just pick one, mainly because the patient retention for these four is 90% or above. Out-of-network benefits, like for MetLife, if you do the math, most of their claims, they follow the 80th percentile, Fair Health's 80th percentile. So if your office fees are at or below the 80th percentile, MetLife pays 100% of your office fees on preventative for most of your claims. Same thing with Guardian, Cigna, and Aetna. Now you have a pretty big dynamic, a change in income just with that one move alone in terms of going out of network. Now we just need to figure out how to retain patients, right? So my pick, as I mentioned, is MetLife. This is the #1 plan to drop in California from a training perspective. Okay, so plan selection is so important. In my opinion, you don't want to start with a difficult plan as your first plan to go out of network with, unless you really want to be bold. If you're really confident in your team, go for it, right? But one of the key dynamics in terms of out of network not working is when the team members are not fully committed and they don't have the right training. Because you see some practices that go out of network, and when patients call in and say, hey, I have MetLife, are you in network with MetLife? And the person at the dental office says, hey, we actually just dropped MetLife and we're no longer accepting new patients, right? And then boom, patient hangs up. You don't want to do that. You want to they have out-of-network benefits. You want to invite them in, right, and have good training in order for you not to lose out on new patient opportunities. New patients is important from an out-of-network perspective. I work with a bunch of CPA groups, and when we look at numbers, most patients within the first 4 years, most of their restorative procedures are done within the first 4-year period of being active in your practice. Year 5 is just mainly pro fees, right? Or perio maintenance if they're doing perio maintenance. But there's not a lot of treatment after year 5. So if you go out of network, the worst thing you could do is cut off new patients. If you have capacity to accept new patients, do it. Accept new patients, because you don't want to have, this curve, year 4, and then all of a sudden your revenue is in decline because you don't have any new treatment opportunities, right? Okay, so going back to the objectives, let's start first with training the teams. That is the best place to start. And also, actually, I'll go back to this slide here real quick, is training your team members. I can't stress enough of the importance as to why that is first, is that your team members are the ones that they're the front line, but also they spend most of the time with most patients, to where if they're bought in, you'll have a much easier time. And starting with one plan will help breed success as your team members start to realize that, hey, this out-of-network journey is not that bad, right? Patients are staying, right? Okay, so that's part 4 of the insurance profile is plan selection and sort of having a good plan in place to train your team members. Part 5 is membership plans. And this is not one area where I think should be taken lightly, mainly because the idea is to get more and more people off of insurance, and a membership plan is a great way to do that. My pick is, I like the Boom Cloud platform and education, the Boom Cloud University. So this comes from the Boom Cloud University in terms of membership plan numbers. The numbers that you see in terms of government reporting, there's a lot of suspicion that those numbers are not correct. So several different organizations out there are claiming that about 150 million Americans don't have dental insurance. The Surgeon General says it's 90 million. So take that for what it's worth. But the reality is that whether it's 90 million or 150 million, that's a lot of patients to get on a membership plan in an effort to sort of avoid patients doing insurance, right? Or even getting your insured patients on a membership plan. So this is a typical membership plan design: $299 a year, $275 to add an additional member, and so it's very basic, hygiene, exams are covered, things of that nature. Kind of looks like a basic level PPO plan that covers preventative with discounts on restorative. These plan designs work mainly in a large part because a lot of people don't have dental insurance. So presenting them with some dental plan, what happens is that if they have insurance and they switch, of course, you have a better vehicle to get paid higher rates from these patients over time, compared to patients that stay on a PPO plan where income tends to be stagnant unless you're going out of network. So here's an example. I'm going to quickly go through this. Because of confidentiality, I can't go into too many details for this particular practice. So this practice contracted with a major employer and convinced this employer to build a dental facility on site. And they said, rather than paying an insurance carrier for 4,054 patients, just pay our practice $5 less than what you're paying the insurance companies on a monthly basis, and we'll give them the exact same plan design, right? So basically, on a membership plan basis, it operated just like a PPO where patients had a co-payment fee schedule only, right? So crowns were 50% off of whatever fee schedule that they created. The fee schedule actually wasn't important for this type of membership plan design. And here's why. So remember I said 36 to 37% of adults are active, right? Based upon insurance numbers. How do you get to 1,500 active patients? So for every 1,500 active patients, that's 30, so assuming they're all adults, that is 37% of 4,054. So in this practice, they're getting paid on a monthly basis for 4,054 patients and getting $30 a month. In other words, $121,000 a month, fixed income every single month. The actual number of active patients ended up being only around 1,500 to 1,600 people. So they were generating $1.9 million off of a 1,500 patient count, right? That's hard to do in the world of PPO in California. But this sort of gives you, from a membership plan perspective, the fixed income is actually one of the things that this doctor said that was such a relief that on the first of every month, he's getting paid $121,000. So he has a lot less stress in terms of operating the business because he knows that money he's already profitable. So, you know, the extra money that he's getting, the $437,000 worth of co-payments, is gravy to him, okay? So that's why membership plans are important. In the interest of time, I'm going to breeze through the membership plans and continue down towards the scripting of out-of-network. So this part where we train your team members, it is so important for them to understand good terminology. We just don't want to, we don't want to give patients a disclosure or an out-of-network conversation that speaks too much towards money, right? When you talk about money too often, it sounds self-serving, and it does tend to put patients off. Even if you say, hey, inflation is crazy right now, prices are up, and unfortunately, we just have to go out of network. That sounds self-serving. Instead, we use out of network, the unrestricted, and we focus on quality, and that changes the patient retention numbers, a night and day difference. So MetLife, Guardian, Cigna, and Aetna, our numbers are showing more, above a 90% rate of retention. For practices that fast pace out of network, they drop insurance and don't notify patients and just send a letter. They typically lose, with Aetna, MetLife, Guardian, and Cigna, closer to 30% of the patients, sometimes 40%, right? You don't want to let that happen. 10% or less is a healthy patient attrition figure for these PPO plans. And the difference is the non-restricted and quality. Now, I'm going to go through some just some basic scripting, right? Meet with our team members. When I meet with the team members, I convey that messaging is that, hey, you are the number one component to quality in the practice, right? In my mind, I'm thinking, well, our team members are the number one expense. Payroll is the number one expense. It's the number one investment for any business owner, any practice owner, is your team members. So they are the number one component of quality. And I convince them of that, is that, hey, we have to protect the quality. And, you know, as you know, with the increase of cost of living, we have to also be mindful of how are we going to influence sustainability of wages into the future, right? But it's not all about that. It's more about the quality. If we have a quality experience and protect the quality, by going out of network, we'll have so much more control over the financial destiny of the practice, which the number one piece are the team members, right? And that's sort of a way to get team members to feel the warm and fuzzies about the fact that you're their number one, right? And get them to believe that, right? So the other part about scripting, so this is sort of the out-of-network scripting that I give to patients while they're in the practice. So I recommend, from a process perspective, is let's meet with our patients as they're coming in for a minimum of 6 months, because we want to be face to face with the majority, if not all, of the patients that had that dental plan, and 6 months is a good time frame to do that. And this is what I say. So when Susie's in that hygiene chair, and the hygiene chair is the #1 place to give this disclosure. Why? Is because hygienists are considered in the realm of the #1 most trusted professionals in the world. And you want to ask your hygienist just to give a quick disclosure that, hey, we're thinking about going out of network. Don't make it a commitment to patients when they hear it for the first time. And the reason why is you don't want to trigger the fight, flight, and freeze response. Well, in this case, freeze doesn't apply, but the fight or flight response. You don't want to offend the patient and have the patient have a knee-jerk reaction to your disclosure of going out of network. So instead, we make it light. Hey, Susie, real quick heads up is we're thinking about the possibility of going out of network with your dental plan. And the reason why is because our current in-network status is so restrictive. It is so hard to sustain good quality care under restrictions written by Wall Street, right? These insurance carriers have no business being in the clinical side of things. So we're just trying to figure out the best way to protect the quality. And so out of network is one option. And so I just wanted to bring that up today, that if we decided to make that move, of course, I will let you know in writing. But if you have any questions or concerns about that, that's my whole purpose of bringing this up, is just to kind of let you know what we're thinking, right? Don't worry about today. We're still in network, and we're not going to make a decision without notifying you first. So most patients respond, and that's sort of my version of it. Most patients respond by saying, I really appreciate you mentioning that. We'll think about it. Well, but as I'm here, I really like coming to your practice, and I get it, making change to be able to treat patients the way you want to treat them and all that. So I don't think we'll leave. I think we'll stay, but we'll think about it, right? And most people will say, actually, we're going to stay. When you hear that, when all of your team members hear this reaction from patients, it breeds so much confidence that you're not going to get yelled at when you go out of network, right? Your patients are resonating with the messaging, but that is a seed that you're planting, right? You talk to every patient as they're coming in for 6 months. On month 6, we send a letter out to patients, and the letter says something along these lines. Hey, dear so-and-so. So earlier this year, we talked to you about the possibility of us going towards an out-of-network status in an effort to protect the quality of dentistry that we know how to deliver. And with your feedback and everybody else that has your same dental plan, we are amazed at the fact that most of you said that you'll stay if we decided to make this move, and that the quality mission, the mission to protect quality, resonated with you and everybody else. So we've decided to move forward. So what does that do to a patient? What that does to a patient, number one, they're going to read the letter because you already planted the seed with them. So they'll spend more time reading what you have to say. They're interested too in what your decision is going to be. But when they see that you made a statement about talking to other patients and you factor their feedback into your decision, and that decision is quality based, the vast majority of the patients respond with a greater sense of loyalty. And when we interview patients about what was your reaction towards getting that letter, and they say, well, this is the first time in my life that a doctor included me in a business decision. It impacts us, the decision, but it's theirs to make. And I just feel so grateful that we were included. Our feedback was included as part of that decision. So they feel bought into the practice at that point, right? And that's how we retain patients, is we build loyalty from that perspective, but we also give better education on what out-of-network means to patients, right? That they can still come here. And that's what's mentioned in the letter. We verified that you could still use your benefits here. And if you so happen to have a plan that doesn't have out-of-network benefits, we have a membership plan that you could switch to. We really want you to stay, right? We're We really want to deliver the mission of quality to you. And you'll find a lot of people, if presented, will switch to your membership plan, including those that have insurance. Well, especially those that have insurance. Okay. Alrighty, here's some other scripting, just some basic Q&A. You can screenshot these things as we kind of move forward. But essentially, the process is we do that 6-month protocol, mind you, 6-month in-person communication protocol. We send our letter to the patients, and then 2 weeks after we send the letter to patients about your decision to go out of network, then we send the termination letter to the insurance company. So why do I have it in that order? It's because in the event the insurance company does send out a letter of their own, and Delta Dental 100% of the time will. Most other insurance plans, it's inconsistent. But it's best for patients to hear out of network from you first, right? That you're going out of network. And when they read your letter first, by the time they receive a letter from the insurance company, they're going to have perspective. And they're likely either not going to read it, or they're going to read it and they're going to laugh because there's very little trust towards insurance companies. A lot of people in dental offices don't believe that you have an enormous amount of trust with the community. And that's because, team members in the office tend to get yelled at from people over stupid things like financials, right? Insurance. Very rarely I hear a complaint about the clinical component, but you do have that going on. But it's mostly about insurance and financial, like money, right? But what we're hearing are people that they don't necessarily have more trust in insurance. They have more trust in the number one component that people think about these days, which is money. They want savings. They don't hate you. They just want to save some money, right? Everybody does. So with that said, again, recap, have your hygienist deliver that script. I know a lot of doctors want to be in control of giving that script to patients too, and that's totally fine. But just coordinate that. It's best delivered in the hygiene chair from a numbers and a patient retention perspective, okay? All righty, so, here's the new patient scripting. Again, taking new patients is important. So this is sort of my version of it. Just, we want to use the bandwagon approach, meaning when we have new patients calling, and those patients hearing that you have a lot of MetLife patients that you're seeing from an out-of-network perspective, they love coming to your practice. That's what's called the bandwagon approach, is that other people are doing it. And that gives people sort of the warm and fuzzies, or at least some assurance, feeling that they're not going to come in and be a guinea pig, right? So when a new patient calls, the number one objective that I have in my mind is, number one, I want to have control over that conversation. I don't want that person to dictate the call or the terms of the call. And most people don't. Most people call in and they say, hey, do you take MetLife or do you take Delta Dental, right? That's the number one question people ask that have insurance. And the first thing I respond with is, thank you so much for calling in today. My name is Ben. I'm going to get to your question here in just a second, but who do I have the pleasure of chatting with? Friendly, non-intimidating way to gain control. The best and most effective way to gain control over any conversation is to ask a question. And then the person gives an answer, and then you dictate the next steps in terms of question. You have the person's attention at that point after they've given you their response. So I ask for the name. They say, my name is Jill. Jill, thank you so much for calling in today. To get your question, we are actually considered an out-of-network, non-restricted provider with MetLife. We have a lot of patients that come to us for that reason, a lot of MetLife patients that come to us for that reason. Again, we're using the bandwagon approach. And the reason why is because our out-of-network non-restricted status, it gives us the best control over quality outcomes without having to deal with unnecessary insurance restrictions. Love to get you scheduled to visit with our world-class hygienist and doctor or doctors, something along those lines. Usually what happens is when you go through that perspective of out-of-network discussion with patients, I always recommend never leaving the end of that discussion open-ended, meaning ask a question. And the best question to ask is, do you prefer mornings or afternoons, right? Something along those lines, so that when you're soliciting a response from a patient, especially when it comes to out-of-network, the vast majority of patients won't even have a concern with what you're saying. So if you go too long in your explanation, you're sort of opening up the door for people to start to make up concerns, right? Or if you ask the wrong question or leave that discussion open-ended, naturally they're going to make up concerns that they didn't have before. But when you end the disclosure with a question, it's called a pattern interrupt from a psychological perspective. A pattern interrupt, and you can Google that and study it. A pattern interrupt essentially takes a person off of unimportant things that are pertaining to your conversation with them, right? And it brings them right back in to be, I shouldn't use the word submissive, but that's what it is they submit to whatever you have to say, right? They just want to follow your lead, right? So that's the idea of a pattern interrupt. So this is the new patient script that I highly recommend everybody implement in an effort to sort of have a continuation of new patients over time, okay? Now, obviously, if the patient doesn't call and say, do you take MetLife? One of the first questions that I want to ask is, of course, we want to get to the part where we're asking about their insurance, mainly to determine, do you have a PPO plan or a discount plan or an HMO or DHMO? Can you come and see us to where we can use your benefits, right? And that's part of a due diligence area that you have to kind of plan out so that you don't have a patient come in, do treatment, and then they're responsible for the entire fee because they have zero out-of-network benefits. Okay. All righty. So we're just about wrapping up here. So Jim asked, what is the membership plan called? It's called Boom Cloud. So if you just Google Boom Cloud and then put the word dental in there, it'll be the first website that'll pop up on the Google search engine. Now, for those of you that have questions, I recommend chatting them into the Q&A or chat session there. In the next couple of minutes, I'm going to wrap up and then hit Q&A for any questions that anybody might have. But a quick recap: build your insurance profile, assess your office fees, usual and customary fees. That's what UCF stands for, in an effort to make sure that you're in a proper alignment with a good percentile of fees to maximize your reimbursements from insurance carriers, or just maximize your income in general. The 60th to 80th percentile is what I recommend. And then, all the other steps there are pretty self-explanatory. And of course, anybody that needs a copy of these slides to reference, just I'll share my contact information here in a minute. You can get a hold of me and ask for the slides. Finally, what I want to cover is, well, what does this mean from a risk or numbers perspective, right? How many patients can I lose to where out of network doesn't make sense? So the very last bullet point is what I want to draw your attention to. So this is the Kodak study commissioned by the Kodak organization back in the 80s. So the 1980s is sort of when digital imaging was starting to, well, it was in its early developmental stages. And Kodak started to lose market share to competitors, and then started to lose market share once digital cameras started to come out. So they asked the question, how much, or by what percentage do we need to increase our fees to maintain profitability if we were to lose X amount of customers, right? Or, how much of an increase do we need to make to survive on a reduced volume of customers, right? So the bottom bullet point, that's the one that is perfect for this out-of-network conversation, right? And keep in mind, at the time, the Kodak organization's overhead was 70%. So these numbers are based upon dentistry numbers, 70% overhead. I know a lot of you are under 70%, but just hear me out for a second. So what Kodak is saying is that if we increase our fees on what we get to charge people by 20%, that means we could lose 45.5% of our customer base and still be profitable, right? So let's equate that to dentistry. If you increase your fees by going out of network by 20%, meaning you're capturing the write-off, right? And your write-off was 20%. Most practices, your write-off is actually closer to 40% in California. But if it's 20%, that means you could lose 45% of your patients and still be profitable. Oh, excuse me. Earn the exact same amount of profits compared to seeing 100% of the patients in network at a 20% write-off level or 20% discount. So because your numbers are, or 40% is what you're actually capturing by going out of network, your threshold for risk is significantly higher than that 45% figure that I mentioned, right? Attrition level. In fact, the numbers indicate that for most practices in California, you would have to lose 33% of your patients to break even on revenue, but you're still ahead in profitability by about 10%. But it's not until you achieve a 45% rate of attrition where you're down on your revenue, but you're making the exact same profit, right? So you're less busy, but still profitable, okay? So that kind of tells me that a lot of you have room to go out of network. In fact, there's not a single practice that I can think of where, well, let me clarify. There's not a single established practice that has 1,500 active patients or more that is not a candidate to go out of network, okay? All right, so what's next? This is just a stupid, funny thing, is that, you know, oftentimes we tend to look at our colleagues as the enemy and target them, but the real enemy is that write-off, right? We got to eliminate that write-off in an effort to be more profitable, and going out of network, to me, is the best way to do that. Now, a couple of resources. These are our websites. Say No to PPOs. I'm going to have that redirected to a website called insuranceuntangledcom. That's our podcast. So this information and a lot more on out-of-network strategies is on saynotoppos.com. Veris and Veritas websites will be updated with out-of-network training by October, with a presentation almost similar to this, but more instructions on a path towards out-of-network and feedback from other clients, and all of that will be made available on these websites in the next couple of months. Here's my email if you have questions or if you want copies of these slides. I'm not a big believer in people emailing me and me kind of soliciting you indefinitely. I don't work that way. So don't be bashful. Send me an email. I'd be happy to get you the slides if anybody's interested. All right. I think we're now ready for Q&A, Jim. Okay, if anybody's on the call today, I'm just trying to pull chat box here. Or Mary, if anybody has questions, feel free to let me know. Okay, I got one question here. Is it really risky to start first by dropping Delta if I'm in network with 20 or more PPO plans? Delta Dental has the worst reimbursements, and I have the greatest losses and the greatest number of patients. Why can't I start with Delta first? Great question. I know that there's a lot of pressure on doctors as it pertains to making out-of-network decisions, to where most would think about dropping Delta first, because what's happening across the country is that those that are still in network with Delta, you're fielding a lot of patients from doctors that drop Delta. And the in-network practices are quite literally getting overrun by patients fleeing, well, the patients that are leaving out-of-network practices and going towards in-network practices. So that's a reason why a lot of doctors want to drop Delta first. To be totally honest, I've witnessed just in the last year over 100 dental practices in California drop Delta as the only plan they went out of network with over the last 12 months. And it's a mixed bag of feedback. The number one piece of feedback that I get from clients is that it's working, is that their patient attrition numbers are higher than the 19% that I mentioned. Excuse me, I think I mentioned it to Dr. Zach at the beginning. The percentage of attrition, the average rate of attrition when you drop Delta Dental, when you use this protocol for out of network, and I'm not the only one, I'm not even the first that taught the 6-month process to go out of network. But when you use that process, the average rate of attrition is 19%. In other words, you're retaining 81% of your Delta patients, and you're significantly more profitable, seeing 19% fewer patients. These are practices that, for the most part, have dropped other PPO plans before they got to Delta. But I can think of several practices in California that started with Delta that have retained more than 81% of their Delta patients. And the common denominator among those practices that are successful starting with Delta first is that they get their team members bought in from day one. Like before you even go out of network with Delta, your team members are 100% bought in. You have great customer service, and you have a good process and plan where your team members can sort of drive the out of network discussions with patients. Okay. Alrighty, so yeah, my answer is yeah. There's no reason why you can't start with Delta. If your team members are ready, go for it. All right, next question. Can you please explain how we can find out how many umbrella plans we are signed up with? So finding that out, gosh, I would recommend starting first just by having your team members piece together all the dental plans that you know you're in network with, right? Secondly, if you put together that list and you look at EOBs and you see that a claim from a small insurance plan was processed under the Zealous network, that means you're in network with Zealous. They also go by the name Maverist, right? Or if you're in network with Connection Dental. The other route that you can go, if you're not looking at that level of detail on EOBs, just call the umbrella networks. You know, after you put together your list, whoever's not on that list, I give them all a call and say, hey, I just check in to see if we're in network with you. Give them your tax ID and your MPI, and that's probably the most for sure way to find out if you're participating with any umbrella networks. Next question. I just started my practice 2 years ago. When is a good time to start going out of network? Excellent question. So if you bought an existing practice and well, there are a few different dynamics that you want to look at. My rule of thumb is that if we're at least 1,500 active patients and we're earning, you know, more than 25 new patients a month, out of network might be a possibility. But on the flip side, if you're booked out 6 months in your hygiene program and your restorative is booked out 1 to 2 months, that is a perfect scenario to start exploring out of network. Is you're at capacity, right? So with regards to your question, a 2-year journey, I'm more than happy to kind of point out some things that you want to look at on a phone call, or you can email me, and I can let you know, if I were you, this is what I would look at to see if you're sort of do like a health test to check out to see if you're busy enough to where out of network might be beneficial. If you're not busy enough, if you're booked out just a week with hygiene and a day or two with restorative, be mindful of the economy. Case acceptance has been down on average throughout the industry since 2020. But this year so far, patient activity is down quite significantly, and it's temporary. I don't say that to freak anybody out. Recessions come and go. We're going to be fine as an industry and as professionals. So when it comes to assessing being in a practice for 2 years, you want to assess the numbers thoroughly just to make sure that you're at a point where you're busy enough to where out of network would make sense. Okay. So yes, I would say explore it. Next question is, I have received several companies that advertise for negotiate or consolidate your PPO plans. Do you recommend them? If so, which one you think works best? I'm not allowed to sell whenever there's CE being put out there. So with that said, that's a question that I have no choice but to be biased with, because that's what I also do for a living. So instead of answering that question directly, here's what I would ask these companies that are out there. Number one, I would ask for references. Number two, I would interview them and see what their processes look like, but more so interview them from the perspective of, would I enjoy working with this person or these people for the next year to year and a half? At the end of the day, everybody has a different price point when it comes to negotiating PPO fees, to where, in my opinion, you want to go with the one that can answer the questions the best, right? So, and then of course, the one that can answer the best and the question the best, that's going to give you the best pricing. So that's my advice in terms of finding a company out there. And you will notice when you put together tough questions, a list of tough questions, you will know who knows their stuff and who doesn't, who's a salesperson and who's a true industry expert. Okay, so that's my advice there. All right, next question. What is the minimum number of active patients you need to consider dropping PPO plans? So it varies. I know that I've been throwing out 1,500 active patients. I need to be careful with that. There are several other dynamics. And so for a 1,500 active patient count, the next thing I'll take a look at is annual patient value on a per PPO plan basis and then an aggregate basis. you'd be surprised. There are some practices that have 1,500 active patients where their annual patient value on average is $350, whereas a practice next door that has 1,500 active patients, their average annual patient value is $780. And that practice that has 780, let's do the math on that. So 780 times, that's a $1.1 million practice, right? That practice is a perfect candidate to go out of network compared to the practice that has a 350 value per patient. So 1,500, that practice is a $525,000 practice. They have the same amount of patients. So those are dynamics that you want to look at. It's more about annual patient value, busyness, as well as the mix of patients that you have to determine whether you want to go out of network or not. But one common criteria that screams out to me in terms of an easy answer is that if you are busy and you're having a hard time putting patients in quickly, like you're booked out 4 or 5, 6 months and you're losing out on new patient opportunities, you got to make room. You got to start thinning out the patient base, let the less committed patients go somewhere else by dropping PPO plans. So under those circumstances where you're busy, it's an easy answer. Yes, let's at least explore out-of-network possibilities, okay? All righty, next question. All righty. Is there a possibility to negotiate terms with an insurance plan that does not have out-of-network benefits to get them to compensate out-of-network benefits for patients? And the answer to that is no. Mainly because it's a budgeting thing for employers. Like Costco, for instance, their Aetna EPO plan, they specifically designed that to have a lower premium for individuals that overall household income is on the lower end and just trying to save on their expenses. So no out-of-network benefits for an EPO plan would have a lower premium to the patient and the employer. So on that part there, if a patient during open enrollment accepts a no out-of-network benefit plan, they cannot change it until next open enrollment season, right? Unless they go and get their own dental insurance which if they're getting it through an employer, chances of that happening are very low. All righty, next question. We just dropped Delta Dental as of today and did what you have suggested in the seminar. We are seeing many patients leave as Delta is offered by the major universities and school districts. What percentage of patients do you think actually come back? We have a few offices within a mile that still take Delta, but most have dropped it. Do you see big companies offering other options now for insurance? Yes. So the competitors in California against Delta Dental are your Blue Cross, Anthem Blue Cross, Blue Shield, MetLife, Cigna, Guardian, and Aetna. Those plans are heavily competing against Delta Dental these days. Now, the first part of your question on patient attrition, don't worry about that. I would say if you drop Delta as of today, the true experience in terms of how many patients will actually leave, you'll know between 6 months to a year. And I see this all the time within the first month of being out of network with Delta. It seems like a lot of patients are leaving, but about a third of the patients come back. These are Delta patients. After the first year, those patients will go and do a recall appointment, a hygiene appointment with another dental practice, and they won't like it. And then they'll come back during their next recall appointment at the 1 year mark or 1.5 year mark. So about 31 to 33% of Delta patients come back to the practice, the ones that have left, after the first year, okay? So yeah, it's too early to tell whether dropping Delta is a good idea or not, Trisha. So just give it some time. I can promise you if you follow these steps, a year from now, you're going to be wiping your brow and saying that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. All righty, okay, let's see here. We got another question. Oh, no, that's not a question. Okay, I think that's it for the questions for today. I don't see any others that are coming in. If for some reason you have questions that you want to ask, just shoot me an email to the email on your screen. I can get those answered offline. But I just want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Thank Dr. Zach, Mary, and of course, Jim and the team for putting this on. Really appreciate your time today. I hope you all learned something or two. And my advice is to keep your head up, especially during hard times. We're all going to be fine as professionals as we navigate the economic storms, but as we also navigate the complexity of dealing with insurance, if you implement these strategies, I can promise you it'll make your life better. So thanks everybody for tonight. I will turn the time back to Dr. Zach now.
Ben, thank you so much. I definitely enjoy being a dentist. I definitely do not enjoy dealing with insurance companies. I found myself nodding my head a lot during your lecture, and I really appreciate everything you said. And it felt a little bit like I was in dentist church dealing with dental company and insurances. Thank you all for joining us. I hope everyone found this information helpful. This meeting was recorded and will be emailed and posted on the San Mateo County Dental Society YouTube channel. Enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on a Wednesday night.